Welcome to Momentum Mind, the place where powerful stories meet personal growth. Here, we turn life-changing books into immersive journeys that awaken your imagination and fuel your mindset for the road ahead. If you're ready to build momentum in your life and unlock the strength within your mind, then you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Weight on His Shoulders. Eli woke up to the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. It fell rhythmically into a small cup he had placed on the floor the night before. The ceiling stain had grown darker, spreading like a bruise. He lay still for a moment, staring at it, before finally dragging himself up from the thin mattress. The room was small, one window cracked and dirty, one wooden chair unsteady, and a mirror that leaned against the wall, showing more dust than reflection. His shoulders slouched forward, spine curved, eyes half hidden beneath his hair. The city outside buzzed and shouted, alive with horns, footsteps, and impatient voices, but in his apartment everything felt heavy and slow. He stared at his reflection. He didn't like what he saw. A man half asleep even when awake. A man who had slowly folded in on himself to take up less space in the world. He looked away. That morning, as he walked to the subway, he passed people who seemed to move with purpose. One woman held her head high, her coat bright red against the gray morning. A man in a suit looked straight ahead, confident. Even a street cleaner hummed a tune while sweeping the sidewalk. Eli noticed them all, and for the first time in weeks he wondered, what do they have that I don't? At the station, the train roared in, full of faces that didn't look up. Eli squeezed in and held the cold metal pole, hunched and small. Across from him stood an old man, tall despite his bent back, wearing a cap and a thick coat. The man noticed Eli's posture and after a moment said quietly, "You look like the world's sitting on your shoulders, son." Eli blinked, startled. "Maybe it is," he muttered. The old man chuckled. "Then push it off. Stand up straight or it'll crush you." When the train stopped, the man stepped off without another word, leaving Eli confused and strangely unsettled. At work, the hours stretched endlessly. He sat at his desk, a temp in a massive office, surrounded by the low hum of keyboards and fluorescent lights. His boss barely noticed him. People passed his cubicle without a glance. He kept his head down, spoke softly, did what he was told. But that day, something shifted. Every time he caught himself slouching, he remembered the old man's voice. "Stand up straight or it'll crush you." At first it was just a small change, rolling his shoulders back, straightening his spine. It felt unnatural, almost painful. But after a while, he felt the difference. His breathing deepened. His voice carried more clearly when he spoke. People started making eye contact with him, just for a moment, but enough to notice. That evening, walking home, he passed a group of teenagers by a convenience store. They laughed loudly, throwing chips at each other, careless and free. One of them bumped into Eli on purpose, testing him. A week ago, Eli would have mumbled an apology and walked away. But now, standing taller, he looked the boy in the eyes. "Watch where you're going," Eli said evenly. The teenager froze, surprised, not by aggression, but by confidence. Then he looked away and muttered something to his friends. Eli kept walking, heart pounding, but with a strange lightness in his chest. When he reached his apartment, he didn't head straight to bed. He stood in front of the mirror again. The room was the same, cracked walls, dripping ceiling, but his reflection wasn't. His shoulders were squared, chin lifted. The lines on his face looked different, less defeated, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stirring inside him. Not pride, not yet, but the faint pulse of control. He sat down and thought of the old man. Who was he? Why had he said that? Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Rain began to fall harder, filling the cup on the floor. Eli didn't move it. He simply stood by the window, watching the water streak the glass, feeling the weight on his shoulders shift, just slightly, as if the world had noticed that he was finally standing up to meet it. He didn't know it yet, but this was the first step, the beginning of his war against chaos, And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the doubt and fatigue, something whispered, "This is only the beginning." Chapter 2. The Boy and the Dragon. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the blinds, waking Eli before the alarm. The sound of the dripping had stopped. The cup on the floor was full, almost overflowing, but still. The quiet felt unusual, heavy with possibility. He made coffee, bitter and strong, and opened his phone to find a message from his sister, Anna. "You haven't visited in months. Come see Ben this weekend. He misses you." Eli stared at the screen for a while before typing a quick, "I'll try." Then he paused and erased it. He wrote instead, "I'll be there." Anna lived 2 hours away, in a small house near the edge of town. Her husband worked late shifts, and their 7-year-old son Ben was wild and loud, a spark of chaos in the quiet house. Eli hadn't seen him since the last family gathering, where he'd mostly stayed in the corner, answering polite questions and avoiding everyone's eyes. But something about this weekend felt different. Maybe it was the old man's voice still echoing in his mind. Or maybe he was just tired of being invisible. When Saturday came, he packed a small bag and took the bus. The city faded into fields and pale blue sky. For the first time in months, he noticed how vast the world was, and how small his apartment had been. Anna greeted him at the door with tired eyes and a warm hug. "You actually came," she said, half teasing, half relieved. "I said I would," he replied. Ben burst into the room holding a toy dragon. "Uncle Eli, watch this." He threw the dragon across the hallway. It hit the wall and lost a wing. Ben frowned. "It always breaks," he said, picking it up. "It's not strong enough." Eli knelt beside him. "Maybe you need to fix it," he said. "I can't," Ben muttered. "It's too hard." "Then maybe it's time you learn." Ben looked up at him, uncertain but curious. Later, while Anna cooked, Eli and Ben sat at the kitchen table surrounded by glue, tape, and broken plastic. Eli worked quietly, showing Ben how to hold the pieces steady until the glue dried. Ben grew impatient. "Why does it take so long?" "Because if you rush it, it won't hold," Eli said softly. "You have to make it strong before you can fly it again." Ben stared at him, then nodded slowly, as if he understood more than his years allowed. When the dragon finally stood whole again, Ben grinned and ran outside to test it. The toy soared briefly, dipped, then caught the wind and climbed higher. Ben cheered, his laughter echoing through the yard. Anna watched from the window. "You're good with him," she said quietly. "He listens to you." Eli shrugged. Maybe he just needed someone to sit with him. But deep down, something stirred, a faint ache, a realization that he'd forgotten how it felt to care for something fragile. That night after dinner, Eli sat on the porch with Anna. The crickets sang, and the air smelled of rain and cut grass. She looked at him for a long time before saying, "You know, Mom used to worry about you. She thought you were disappearing." Eli frowned. "I'm fine." "Are you?" she asked softly. "Because I think you've been lost for a long time, always waiting for someone to tell you what to do, how to live. But life doesn't wait for anyone to catch up." Her words hit harder than she meant them to. Eli wanted to argue but couldn't. Instead, he said, "Maybe I just forgot how to take care of myself." Anna nodded. "Then start small, clean your place, cook something good, make it feel like someone lives there." Later, lying on the couch, Eli couldn't sleep. The house was silent except for the wind outside. He thought about the dragon, broken, fixed, flying again. He thought about Ben's small hands, trembling as he tried to hold the pieces together. And he thought about himself, drifting for so long that he had almost stopped believing he could repair anything. He sat up suddenly, a strange energy running through him. Maybe the old man on the train, the red-coated woman, his sister. Maybe they were all signs, little fragments of something calling him back to life. He got up quietly and went to the kitchen. On the counter sat a note Anna had written before going to bed. Thanks for coming. Ben needed you. Maybe you needed him too. Eli stared at the note for a long time, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. The moonlight through the window glimmered on the toy dragon, resting on the table, wings spread. It looked alive, ready to take off again. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath all the noise and hesitation, Eli felt a quiet challenge forming, to fix what was broken, not just in his world but within himself. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Inside, the dragon waited, wings trembling in the silver light. Chapter 3. The Mirror of Friends. When Eli returned to the city, the streets felt sharper, louder, and more alive than before. The noise didn't bother him anymore. He walked taller, and even the gray sky seemed brighter, as if it had been washed clean overnight. The apartment, however, greeted him with silence. The cup of rainwater was still on the floor, now stale and half evaporated. The smell of damp hung in the air. He threw the water out, opened the window, and stood there for a while, breathing. He spent that evening cleaning. Slowly at first, picking up clothes, throwing away old takeout boxes, wiping dust from forgotten corners. With each small motion, the space began to change. It wasn't much, but it was his. When he finally sat down, the room looked larger. He noticed it in his chest, a strange, unfamiliar lightness. The next morning, he decided to meet an old friend, Marcus, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. Marcus had always been the opposite of Eli, loud, confident, a storm that filled every room he entered. They had gone to university together, once shared dreams of doing something great. But somewhere along the way, Eli had faded into routine while Marcus had chased success. They met at a cafe near the river. Marcus arrived in a dark coat, smiling broadly. "Eli, you look different," he said with a grin. "Different good or different bad?" Eli asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Good. You used to walk around like a ghost. Now you look awake." They ordered coffee and talked. At first it was easy, old jokes, memories, small laughter. But as Marcus began to talk about his new business, his travels, his plans, Eli felt something stir, a mixture of admiration and quiet resentment. Marcus seemed unstoppable. Everything he touched turned forward, faster, brighter. Eli wanted to be happy for him, but he couldn't ignore the dull ache that grew in his chest. Marcus noticed. "You all right?" "Yeah," Eli said quickly. "Just tired." Marcus studied him. "You know, I used to worry about you. You had all this talent, but no direction. What happened?" Eli looked out the window. The river shimmered under the gray sky. "I got lost," he said finally. "Didn't realize it until recently." Marcus nodded slowly. "It's easy to do. But hey, it's never too late to start over." There was no judgment in his voice, only quiet certainty. And in that moment, Eli realized something he had never admitted to himself, that he'd been avoiding people who reminded him of what he could have been. Marcus wasn't a threat. He was a mirror. They walked along the river after coffee. Marcus talked about his team, his challenges, his sleepless nights. "People think I've got it figured out," he said, kicking a stone. "Truth is, I'm winging it every day." Eli laughed softly. "So you're saying chaos doesn't disappear when you're successful?" Marcus smirked. "No, you just learned to dance with it." When they parted ways, Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't disappear again," he said. "You've got something to say. Don't hide it." Eli walked home with those words echoing in his mind. Don't hide it. He passed a street musician playing a slow, beautiful melody on the violin. People hurried past without looking, but Eli stopped. He watched the man's fingers, steady, graceful, alive. The notes rose above the city noise like a prayer. The musician caught Eli's eye and smiled faintly, nodding in silent acknowledgement. For a second, Eli felt the strange connection that exists only between two people who understand struggle, the kind that never shows on the surface. That night, he took out an old notebook from the back of his closet. It was filled with half-written stories, forgotten sketches, pieces of ideas he had once loved but abandoned when life got too heavy. He turned the pages slowly, tracing the faded ink with his fingers. Something in him ached, but it wasn't regret. It was recognition. He hadn't lost his dreams. He had just buried them. He wrote for the first time in years. Just a few sentences, rough and uncertain, but alive. Words came out shaky at first, then faster, like water breaking through a cracked dam. Hours passed. He didn't notice. When he finally stopped, the city outside was asleep. He closed the notebook and looked at his reflection in the dark window, the faint outline of a man rediscovering his own shape. And then, for the first time in a long time, Eli smiled. He didn't know why. Maybe because he'd seen that Marcus wasn't perfect either. Maybe because he had faced the shadow of envy and found something honest underneath. The smile faded slowly. He leaned closer to the window, seeing the ghost of his own face staring back. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "I'll keep going tomorrow." But outside, across the street, a light flickered in an apartment window, a shape moving quickly inside, a shadow pacing back and forth. Something about it caught his attention, unsettling and strange, like a warning. He couldn't explain why, but the longer he stared, the heavier the air became, until he turned away and closed the blinds. The night was suddenly quiet again, too quiet, and deep down Eli knew that something was coming, something that would test everything he had just begun to rebuild. Chapter 4. The shadow across the street. Rain returned to the city steady and endless. It blurred the windows, softened the noise, and made everything shimmer as if the streets themselves were remembering something. Eli sat by the window, coffee growing cold in his hands, eyes fixed on the building across from his own. The light that had flickered there last night was on again. Behind the thin curtains, a shape moved, back and forth again and again, like a restless ghost. It wasn't unusual to see people through the neighboring windows, but there was something different about this one. The figure never turned on more than a single lamp, never opened the blinds, never stopped pacing. He told himself it didn't matter. But every evening that week when he came home from work, his eyes drifted to that same glowing window. Sometimes the figure sat perfectly still. Other times it stood by the glass, almost watching back. Eli didn't know why it unnerved him. Maybe because it reminded him of what he used to be, trapped inside, unseen, alive only in shadows. On Friday, he came home late. The city felt damp and alive, lights flickering in puddles. He climbed the stairs to his apartment and stopped halfway when he heard something, a muffled thud, then another. It came from the direction of that apartment across the narrow courtyard. He hesitated, heart beating faster, listening. Then silence. Only rain again. He shook his head. "You're imagining things," he whispered to himself, and went inside. But the sound came again the next night, louder this time, and when he looked out the window, the light was off. Total darkness. He stood there for a long time, uncertain whether to do something or nothing. Then quietly, he turned away. That night, he dreamed he was back in his childhood home, standing in the hallway, calling out for someone who never answered. The air smelled of rain and something burning. When he woke up, his throat was dry and the sound of rain was gone. The city had gone still. Eli got dressed and stepped outside before dawn. The streets were slick, reflecting the first pale hints of light. He walked without purpose, drawn by some quiet need to move. He passed a bakery setting up for the morning, a stray cat licking its fur under an awning, a man sweeping broken glass from the sidewalk. The world was waking up again, slow and heavy. He ended up near the river, the same spot where he'd walked with Marcus days ago. The air smelled of wet stone and coffee from a nearby kiosk. He leaned on the railing and watched the water flow past, dark and steady. A voice behind him said, "You look like you're waiting for something to happen." Eli turned. It was a woman about his age, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed too awake for this hour. She wore a raincoat and held a camera. "I guess I am," he said. "What are you waiting for?" she asked. He thought about it. "I'm not sure. Maybe for the noise in my head to quiet down." She smiled, not mocking but understanding. "It never really does. You just learn to listen to it differently." She took a picture of the river, then looked at him again. "I come here every morning. The light changes everything, makes even the ugly parts look honest." Eli nodded. "I could use some honesty." "Then keep showing up," she said. "The light always finds those who wait for it." She walked away before he could ask her name. All day, her words stayed with him. Keep showing up. When he returned home that evening, the light across the courtyard was on again. The figure was sitting near the window, perfectly still, head tilted down as if in thought. For a moment, Eli almost raised his hand, as though he could somehow wave across the distance. But he didn't. He simply stood there watching until his reflection swallowed the image. That night, he cleaned again, this time with more purpose. He fixed the broken chair, changed the burnt-out bulb, folded his clothes neatly. He didn't know why, but it felt important, like preparing for something unseen. When everything was done, he sat on the floor beside his notebook, opened it, and began to write. Not about work, not about his past, about now. The street outside, the stranger in the window, the woman by the river, all of it blending into something that felt alive. Hours passed unnoticed. At some point, he looked up and saw that the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected off the wet rooftops. Across the courtyard, the window was still glowing faintly, but the figure was gone. For reasons he couldn't explain, that absence filled him with a sudden, irrational fear. He stepped closer to the glass, peering out into the night. Nothing moved. And then, in the stillness, he saw it. A flicker of light on his own window pane, a reflection he hadn't noticed before. Someone had been watching him. The realization hit hard, cold, and quiet. He took a step back, heart pounding. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Just his own pale reflection, staring back. He told himself it was a trick of light, fatigue, imagination. But deep down he knew something had shifted. The thin veil between observer and observed had begun to tear, and as he sat back down, staring at the dark window, he felt the world outside pressing closer, waiting, watching, whispering for him to step further into its chaos. Chapter 5. The Stranger's Apartment. Eli couldn't stop thinking about that light. All day at work, his mind drifted back to it. The faint glow across the courtyard, the still shadow inside it, the strange moment when he thought someone had been watching him. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else. A curiosity with teeth. By evening, the city had turned gold under the setting sun. The rain had washed the streets clean and the sky glowed like melted copper. Eli walked home slowly, watching people hurry past him. Couples holding hands, kids laughing near a bus stop, a man arguing into his phone. Life moved fast. But inside him, something had slowed down, become quieter and sharper. When he reached his building, he stopped on the stairs again. Across the courtyard, the light was on. Faint, steady, familiar. He stared at it. Then, almost without deciding to, he crossed the street. The neighboring building was old, with cracked bricks and a metal door that creaked when he pushed it open. The hallway smelled of damp paper and forgotten things. He hesitated on the first step, listening. Only silence. His pulse quickened as he climbed. Each step echoed softly, like a whisper of something he shouldn't be doing. But he kept going until he reached the door he thought was the right one. Apartment 3B. He stood there for a long moment, unsure what to say if someone actually answered. Maybe he'd say there was a leak, or a noise, or that he'd mistaken the address, but before he could knock, the door opened slightly on its own, as if pushed by a small draft. Eli froze. "Hello?" he called quietly. No answer. The door creaked wider. Inside, the room was dimly lit, just one lamp by the window. Papers lay scattered on the floor, along with paintbrushes and small jars of color. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and dust. On the easel near the window stood a half-finished painting, dark blues and grays swirling into the outline of a cityscape. And in the center of that painted city, almost invisible, was a small, solitary figure standing by a window. His window. Eli stepped closer, heart thudding. The figure was unmistakable. Slouched shoulders, the faint outline of a reflection behind the glass. It was him. He spun around, half expecting someone to be there. But the room was empty. A sound startled him. Soft footsteps in the hallway. He turned toward the door. A moment later, a woman appeared, carrying a small bag of groceries. The same woman he'd met by the river. She stopped when she saw him. Her expression didn't show fear, only surprise, and then a faint smile. "I wondered when you'd come," she said calmly, setting down the bag. Eli stared at her. "You live here?" "I do." She walked past him, closing the door gently. "You've been watching the light." He nodded slowly. "You've been watching me?" "Observing," she corrected. "You looked like someone trying to find his way out of the dark." He didn't know what to say. "Why paint me?" She looked at the canvas. "Because you reminded me of what it feels like to start again. You stand at your window every night, quiet but alive. I could see it." He felt a strange mix of unease and understanding. The room was messy but alive, art supplies everywhere, sketches taped to the walls, colors spilling into each other. Everything here breathed. She offered him tea and they sat on the floor, surrounded by unfinished paintings. Her name was Mara. She was a painter who lived alone, creating worlds that few ever saw. "People look but don't see," she said softly. "They walk past 100 small miracles every day." Eli thought of Marcus, of his sister, of Ben's broken dragon. "I think I forgot how to see," he admitted. Mara smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what you're here for. To remember." They talked for hours, about work, about silence, about the strange pull of invisible things. She told him she painted the city because it was chaos made visible, but in that chaos, she saw beauty. "Everything moves toward disorder," she said, "but that's what makes life possible. Creation is just order fighting back." The words stayed with him long after he left. That night, back in his apartment, Eli sat by his own window again. The lamp across the courtyard was still glowing, but now he knew who sat beside it. Someone who had been seeing him all along. He opened his notebook and began to write, the words flowing like quiet thunder. Sometimes the only way to find yourself is to look through someone else's eyes. He closed the notebook, feeling a strange, new calm. The kind that follows a storm, not because it's over, but because you've learned to stand inside it. But as he turned off the light and lay down, something on the wall caught his attention. A small smudge, faint but visible in the glow from the street lamp. He leaned closer. It wasn't a smudge. It was a mark, a handprint. He touched it, dry, faintly dusty, but unmistakably there. For a long moment, Eli sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city. He didn't know if the handprint had always been there or if it was new. Either way, it made the room feel smaller. And as the night deepened, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, had touched his world. Not with malice, but with intent. Chapter 6. The canvas between them. Morning light spilled across Eli's desk, gentle and gold. He had slept little, the handprint on the wall still printed in his mind. In daylight it looked smaller, ordinary, like a patch of dust. Yet something about it stayed with him. He took the early train that day. The carriage was half empty, filled with the sound of pages turning, quiet sighs and the rattle of metal on rails. He found himself sketching in his notebook, lines, shapes, fragments of the city. He didn't know what he was drawing until he noticed it. A window, a silhouette, a faint suggestion of someone watching. When he looked again, he smiled. Maybe Mara was right. Maybe seeing meant allowing the world to reflect itself through you. After work, he walked to her building. The door creaked just the same, but now he didn't hesitate. He climbed the stairs and knocked. Mara opened, hair tied loosely, paint on her fingers. "I thought you'd come back," she said, stepping aside. The room looked different in daylight. Paintings leaned in rows along the wall, color spilling from one frame into another. Storms, faces, streets, all half real, half dream. The smell of turpentine mixed with coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. "You paint fast," Eli said. "I paint while I can," she replied, "before the light changes." She handed him a mug. "You write?" "Trying to again," he said. "Then we're both rebuilding." They worked in silence for a while. She painting, he writing. The only sound was the brush whispering against the canvas, the scratch of pen on paper. For the first time in a long time, Eli felt the kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, but peace. When she finally spoke, it was without looking up. "You used to think too much about the end," she said. "You can see it in the way you stand, always braced for something to fall apart." He looked at her, surprised. "How would you know that?" "I paint people," she said simply. "Their bodies tell stories before their words do." Eli thought of how he had stood in front of his mirror weeks ago, hunched, smaller than he was. He hadn't realized how visible that weakness had been. Mara smiled, sensing his thoughts. "It's not shameful to be broken," she said softly. "What matters is that you don't stay that way." The room grew quiet again. Outside, thunder murmured distantly, like the world agreeing. When the rain began, they opened the window instead of closing it. The scent of wet air filled the room. Mara stretched her hand out into the rain, catching droplets in her palm. "See?" she whispered. "You don't have to hide from storms. Sometimes they clean the dust." Eli felt something loosen inside him. The guilt, the hesitation, the endless noise of self-doubt. "You talk like someone who's lived 1,000 lives," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just pay attention." As the rain softened, she turned to him. "You should write about people, about what they carry when no one's watching." He nodded slowly. "Maybe I already am." The day faded into evening. Mara lit a small lamp, the same one Eli had once seen from his own apartment. The yellow light wrapped the room in warmth. He realized how much he had missed this, the simple presence of another person, unguarded and alive. When he left, the rain had stopped completely. The streets glistened, puddles reflecting the sky. From across the courtyard, he could see her through the window, painting again, her movements steady and deliberate. He sat by his own window, notebook open, and began to write the first line that felt true in months. Sometimes, healing begins when two people decide to stop pretending they don't see each other. He didn't write anything after that. The line felt complete. The city outside hummed with life, and for the first time, Eli didn't feel separate from it. He felt part of something moving. Slow, imperfect, but real. Then his phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Marcus. "Need to talk. It's important." Eli stared at the screen. The words looked urgent, heavy with something unspoken. He typed back quickly. "What happened?" No reply. Just the faint vibration of the phone as the message went unanswered. Outside, the lights of the city flickered, as if the night itself had drawn a breath. Chapter 7. The Cracks in the Glass. The city felt colder that morning, the kind of cold that sneaks under your jacket and settles against your ribs. Eli hadn't slept well. Marcus's message had echoed in his mind all night. When he finally left the apartment, the sun was just beginning to rise behind a blur of cloud and smog. He met Marcus in a small diner tucked between two closed storefronts. The place smelled of burnt coffee and old wood. Marcus sat in a booth by the window, shoulders slumped, eyes tired in a way Eli had never seen before. "Thanks for coming," Marcus said quietly as Eli sat down. "You said it was important." "It is," Marcus hesitated, then added, "Everything's falling apart?" Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" "The company. The investors pulled out. We expanded too fast, hired too many people. I thought I could handle it, but—" He stopped, pressing his hands against his temples. "It's like watching something you built with your own hands start to crack, and you can't do anything to stop it." Eli looked at him. This man who had always seemed unshakable, now unraveling in front of him. "You always looked like you had everything under control," Eli said softly. Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "Everyone looks like that until you're close enough to see the mess." They drank their coffee in silence. The diner's neon light flickered against the window, making Marcus's reflection tremble. Eli thought about all the times he'd envied Marcus, his confidence, his pace, his certainty. And now, seeing him like this, he realized that success didn't protect anyone from chaos. It only changed its shape. "What are you going to do?" Eli asked. "I don't know," Marcus said. "Part of me wants to walk away. Another part can't let go." He leaned back, eyes distant. "You ever feel like the thing that once gave your life meaning is now the thing that's destroying it?" Eli nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "But I think meaning isn't something you find once and keep forever. You have to rebuild it every time it breaks." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then he smiled faintly. "You sound different, Eli. Stronger. Maybe I just stopped pretending I didn't care." They left the diner and walked toward the river. The water was gray and restless under the overcast sky. Marcus threw a small pebble into it. "You ever think we're all just trying to balance between order and chaos?" he asked. Eli smiled. "Every day." When they parted, Marcus looked steadier. "Thanks," he said. "You always listened better than most." Eli shrugged. "Maybe that's all we really need sometimes." As he walked home, Eli thought about what had just happened. The man he'd once seen as a symbol of control had admitted he was lost. It made Eli realize something simple but profound. Everyone was fighting a battle invisible to others. Back at his apartment, he sat by the window. Across the courtyard, Mara's light was on again. She was painting, her movements fluid, sure. For a moment he watched her, not as a mystery, but as a mirror of his own struggle. He opened his notebook and wrote, "There are cracks in everything. Maybe that's how the light gets in." He closed the notebook and looked up again, and froze. Mara was standing perfectly still, brush in hand, staring straight at him through the glass. Not painting, not moving, just looking. He hesitated, unsure whether to wave or look away. Then, slowly she raised her hand and pressed it to the window, her palm against the glass. The gesture wasn't strange exactly, but something in it felt heavy, deliberate. Eli lifted his hand too, pressing it against his own side of the glass, mirroring her without thinking. For a heartbeat, the world went utterly quiet. Then she smiled, a small, tired smile, and lowered her hand, turning back to her painting. Eli sat there for a long time after that, staring at the faint outline of his own reflection against hers, wondering what she had seen in him this time, and what she was painting now. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, tapping against the glass like quiet questions. Chapter 8. The colors we carry. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, turning the streets of the city into ribbons of light and shadow. Eli walked slowly, hands in his pockets, notebook tucked under his arm. His thoughts circled Mara, the way she moved, the way she looked at the world, and how her quiet strength mirrored the part of himself he was only just beginning to uncover. He found himself at her building before he realized he had planned to knock. The door creaked as he entered, familiar now, and he climbed the stairs. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, reminding him that some moments demanded courage simply to arrive. Mara opened the door before he could knock. "You're early," she said, a smile flickering across her face. Her eyes held something like surprise, or maybe relief. "I didn't know if I'd show up," he admitted. "But I did." She gestured for him to enter. The room was a small universe unto itself. Canvases leaned against every wall, their colors bold and chaotic, yet somehow ordered. The smell of wet paint and linseed oil was comforting now, familiar like the scent of a place he had once belonged to. "I've been working on something," Mara said, gesturing toward an easel in the corner. "But I don't think it's finished." Eli walked closer. The canvas was filled with swirling lines, dark shadows, and bright bursts of color mingling together. At first it was impossible to tell what it was. Shapes pressed against shapes, movement folded into movement. But then, slowly, he saw it. A cityscape, fractured and alive, with countless small figures moving through the streets, some barely visible, others standing out in brilliant light. "It's alive," he whispered. "That's the idea," Mara said softly. "Life isn't neat. We carry the chaos within us, the parts we try to hide, the colors that scare us. But all of it has to exist together if we want it to mean something." Eli nodded, absorbing her words. He thought of Marcus and the way he had confessed his own cracks. He thought of Ben, holding a broken dragon and trying to make it fly. He realized that chaos wasn't an enemy. It was something he had been running from, something he had feared, something he had to understand. They spent hours together, Eli writing, Mara painting. At first, he wrote about what he saw. The city outside, the movement of the rain, the people rushing past. Then he wrote about what he felt. The small stirring of courage, the sense that he was beginning to exist in a way he hadn't before. Mara didn't speak much, only occasionally offering a word or a gesture. But Eli realized her silence wasn't absence, it was presence. She let him fill the space with his own discovery. By evening, the room smelled of coffee and wet paper. The rain had stopped completely. Outside, the city lights reflected off the damp streets, 1,000 small sparks in the darkness. "You've changed," Mara said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "There's something different about the way you move, about the way you look at the world." Eli looked at her, unsure what to say. "I'm trying," he admitted. "That's the important part," she said. "You're trying. You're showing up." They sat in silence again. Eli glanced at the canvas. For the first time, he understood that each figure, each swirl of color, was a reflection of her own journey. Her fears, her hope, her determination to see the world clearly even when it was messy, and he realized that he was beginning to do the same for himself. The night grew quiet. Eli felt a strange peace settle over him, tempered with the unshakable knowledge that life would never be simple, never neat. But maybe that was the point. As he left her apartment, Mara handed him a small sketch. It was of a single figure standing at a window, shoulders square, chin lifted, watching the city move below. "Don't forget this," she said. "You carry the colors you need. Don't lose them." Eli held the sketch in his hand as he walked back through the dark streets. The city seemed to breathe around him, alive and unpredictable. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not like a man hiding in the shadows, but like someone stepping into the light. When he reached his own apartment, he placed the sketch on his desk. He didn't sleep immediately. He sat by the window, staring across the courtyard at the faint glow of Mara's lamp. For a long time, he just watched, thinking about the colors, the chaos, the people, and the small miracles of being alive. And then he noticed it. A shadow moving in the corner of his apartment. Not hers. Not Marcus's. Something else. Something familiar yet unrecognized. He froze, breath caught in his chest, heart hammering against ribs that felt suddenly too tight. Whatever it was, he knew this was no ordinary night. And deep inside, he felt it. The world he had begun to rebuild was about to test him in ways he had not imagined. Chapter 9. The Weight of Truth. The next morning, the city was damp and gray, streets slick with the residue of last night's rain. Eli left his apartment earlier than usual, walking without purpose, letting his thoughts drift. He carried Mara's sketch in his coat pocket, her words echoing softly. You carry the colors you need. Don't lose them. As he crossed the street, he saw Marcus waiting outside a small office building, shoulders tense, jaw tight. The moment Eli approached, Marcus's face darkened. Eli, he said without greeting, it's worse than I thought. Eli frowned. What happened? Marcus gestured for him to follow into a nearby cafe. They sat in a corner booth, the smell of coffee heavy in the air. Marcus leaned in, voice low and urgent. It's the investors. They're pulling out. They've frozen all accounts. Everything we built, it's gone. Maybe irreversibly. Eli's stomach tightened. So, what do you need from me? I need someone who's not afraid to face it, Marcus said. Someone who can help me sort through the mess before it swallows me whole. I don't know if I can do it alone. Eli stared at him. He had spent weeks finding small pieces of himself, learning to stand straighter, to write, to face his own shadows. And now Marcus, always a symbol of certainty and control, was asking for help. I'll help, Eli said. Marcus exhaled, relief washing over him, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. It's not just paperwork, he admitted. It's the people, the contracts, the trust. I have to face everyone I've let down, and I don't know if I have the courage. Eli nodded slowly, understanding in a way he hadn't weeks ago. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. They worked through the day, Marcus explaining every detail, Eli taking notes, asking questions, organizing. Hours passed and the cafe emptied, leaving them in the hum of neon and the scent of stale coffee. By evening, Marcus looked at Eli with raw honesty. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Every time I think I have a plan, something else falls apart. Eli felt the weight of his own past, the months of hiding, of letting life pass him by. He leaned forward. You're stronger than you think. You've built this from nothing. Don't let fear make you forget that. Marcus hesitated, then gave a small, tired smile. Maybe that's what I needed. Someone to remind me of it. When Eli left the cafe, night had fully fallen. The streets were quiet, street lamps casting long shadows. He thought of Mara, her paintings, the colors she had said he carried inside himself. He realized that strength didn't come from hiding from chaos or controlling it completely. It came from seeing it clearly, acknowledging it, and acting anyway. Back in his apartment, he opened his notebook and began to write. This time, not about Mara or Marcus, not about the city or the rain, but about himself. About fear, about courage, about the small victories that could be claimed only by standing and facing the truth. Hours later, he leaned back and read what he had written. Chaos exists, but it does not own me. I am standing, I am here, and I will act. He felt a strange, quiet pride, but it was fragile, like a thin flame flickering in a gust of wind. As he set the notebook down, he noticed a faint vibration from his phone. A new message. It was from an unknown number. You're being watched. Be careful who you trust. Eli stared at the screen. The words felt heavy, almost tangible. His apartment, quiet just moments ago, suddenly seemed small, constricting. He pressed the phone to his chest, heart racing. He had begun to rebuild himself, face the chaos and find courage. But the world outside was reminding him that danger, hidden or subtle, never truly disappeared. Somewhere across the city, he knew, life was moving, people were acting, and consequences were gathering. And Eli understood with an icy clarity that standing upright was only the beginning. Chapter 10. Crossing the Invisible Line. The city was drenched in fog the next morning. Streetlights glowed like pale lanterns, and the buildings seemed heavier, pressing in from all sides. Eli moved through it slowly, the message from last night still burning in his mind. You're being watched. Be careful who you trust. He tried to dismiss it as a prank, some random fear-triggered text. But the unease stayed, clinging to him like damp clothes. Every passerby, every reflected window seemed to hold invisible eyes. Even the familiar streets felt strange, alien. At work, the pressure intensified. Marcus had called earlier, desperate. The company's accounts were frozen, contracts in disarray, and employees were restless, whispering rumors of layoffs. Eli sat in a small conference room with Marcus, piles of papers and laptops open before them. "Everywhere I turn," Marcus said, rubbing his temples. "There's a problem I didn't see coming. I thought I was prepared, but—" His voice trailed off. Eli felt the familiar knot of anxiety growing in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had learned to face pressure before, to meet chaos with action rather than retreat. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Step by step, one thing at a time." Marcus's eyes were sharp now, almost desperate. "Do you understand, Eli? It's not just numbers, it's everything. Trust, reputation, people's livelihoods. One wrong move and it all collapses." Eli nodded. He had been afraid before, but this was different. Fear now had a shape, a form he could meet, confront, and act against. The afternoon dragged, filled with phone calls, emails, and tense meetings. By the time he left, the city had sunk into the kind of darkness that isn't just night, but a weight pressing from every corner. He walked toward Mara's building, thinking that perhaps seeing her, even for a few minutes, could ground him again. When he arrived, her door was open, faint light spilling into the hallway. But something was wrong. Inside, the room was quiet, too quiet. The canvases were in place, the paints on the table, but Mara herself was not in sight. Eli's eyes moved to the window. No silhouette. No brush strokes in motion. "Hello?" he called softly. A rustling from the back corner made him freeze. He stepped closer. There, tucked behind a stack of canvases, Mara sat with her knees pulled up, head bowed. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her. "What happened?" Eli asked, crouching beside her. She looked up, eyes wide, almost desperate. I didn't think you'd come today. I've been avoiding something." "What is it?" She shook her head. "I shouldn't have painted that piece of you without asking. I saw too much, I shouldn't have." Eli studied her. Her hands trembled, and he realized she had been carrying her own chaos in silence, hidden beneath her strength and composure. "You don't have to hide it," he said quietly. "I understand now. I carry my own weight, but that doesn't mean we can't face it together." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. Then Mara exhaled, releasing a tension that had been coiled for days. She looked at him, a small, hesitant smile forming. "I guess we're both being watched in a way," she whispered. Eli nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. Life had a way of observing, testing, pressuring, showing cracks in the strongest walls. And now, with Marcus's collapse, the mysterious message, and Mara's own vulnerabilities, the cracks in his world were becoming visible, undeniable. He stood and took a deep breath. "Then we don't hide. We face it." Outside, rain began again, tapping softly against the windows, washing the city in silver. Eli felt the strange clarity that comes when the pressure is highest, fear still there but sharpened into resolve. And just as he was about to leave, his phone vibrated once more. A new message. "Some doors, once opened, can't be closed." He stared at the screen, heart pounding. This time, there was no doubt. The world outside was no longer waiting passively for him. It had begun to push back. Eli pressed the phone to his chest. His apartment, his life, his mind, all were about to be tested, and he knew he could no longer retreat into safety. Whatever was coming, he had already crossed the line. Chapter 11. The Breaking Point. The city was restless that evening. Wind gusted through the narrow streets, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and the faint tang of smoke from distant chimneys. Eli moved through it with a sense of quiet urgency, Mara's sketch folded in his coat pocket, his mind still haunted by the last two messages. "You're being watched. Be careful who you trust. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed." He tried to tell himself they were warnings, maybe from someone who wanted to scare him, or maybe just coincidences. But the way his chest tightened, the way his senses seemed sharper, told him they were more than random. Marcus had called earlier, The tone in his voice was urgent, raw. "Eli, I need you at the office tonight. There's something I haven't told you. You need to see it for yourself." Eli agreed immediately. He didn't know what awaited him, but the weight of inaction had grown unbearable. The office building loomed as he arrived. Its glass doors reflected the flickering city lights, distorted, like a fractured mirror. He swiped his card and entered, the elevator humming quietly as it climbed to the top floor. Marcus was waiting, pacing, shoulders tense. His hands shook slightly when he gestured for Eli to follow him into the conference room. "What is it?" Eli asked. Marcus opened a laptop. The screen displayed spreadsheets, emails, and contracts, all tangled, some marked urgent, others showing sudden withdrawals or red flags. "Fraud," Marcus said in a low voice. "Someone on the inside has been siphoning funds, falsifying reports. I didn't notice until yesterday, and it's extensive. They know we're close to finding out." Eli felt a chill run through him. The stakes were higher than he imagined. Every small mistake, every oversight, every moment of distraction had allowed chaos to creep in unnoticed. "We have to confront them," Marcus said. "We can't wait. If we do, it'll be too late." Eli nodded. He realized now that fear wasn't a signal to stop. It was a signal to act with clarity. They spent the next hours reviewing accounts, tracing patterns, and planning confrontation. The work was grueling, exhausting, but for the first time in months, Eli felt alive. Alive in the weight of responsibility, alive in the intensity of facing truth. By midnight, they were ready. Marcus dialed the number of the employee they suspected, a young analyst who had always seemed competent, loyal, invisible. The line clicked. Eli held his breath. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. "Yes?" Marcus's tone was firm, edged with controlled anger. "We need to speak immediately. Your actions have consequences, and we know what you've done." There was a pause. Then softly, almost inaudibly, "I don't know what you mean." Eli felt the tension coil tighter in his chest. Every nerve in his body screamed. This confrontation was more than accounting. It was a test of his own courage, his ability to stand upright while chaos threatened to pull everything down. The line went silent again. Then the voice whispered, almost casually, "Be careful. Not everyone is who they appear to be." Eli's heart raced. That phrase echoed the messages from earlier. Someone was watching, someone knew, someone was always a step ahead. The threat was real, not abstract, not distant, close. Marcus turned to him, eyes wide, exhausted. "We have to finish this, now." They spent the next 2 hours in tense coordination, confronting the employee, securing evidence, documenting everything. Every second felt stretched, as if the city itself had slowed to watch them. When it was over, Marcus slumped in his chair, relief washing over his face. "We did it," he said, voice trembling. Eli nodded, but he didn't feel relief. He felt awareness. Danger wasn't gone. The world hadn't calmed. But he also felt something new, the quiet certainty that he could meet it, face it, act despite it. He left the office in the early hours. The streets were slick and quiet, reflections of streetlights and puddles stretching endlessly. He walked home slowly, Mara's words in his mind, Marcus's struggle fresh in his memory. When he reached his apartment, he didn't sit by the window. He didn't pick up his notebook immediately. Instead, he stood in the center of the room, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of everything. Fear, responsibility, courage, chaos, and realizing for the first time that he could carry it all without breaking. Outside, the city waited. Unknown, unpredictable, alive. But for the first time, Eli wasn't afraid to step into it, and in the quiet of his apartment, he made a silent promise. No matter what came next, he would face it, upright, awake, ready. Chapter 12. Standing in the Light. The morning broke quietly. The city felt different somehow, heavier, sharper, like it had been holding its breath and was finally exhaling. Eli woke early, restless, Mara's sketch and notebook beside him. Every night since the confrontation with Marcus and the hidden threats, he had dreamed in fragments. Shadows, whispers, flashes of light reflecting on wet streets. He dressed quickly and walked to the cafe where he and Marcus had spent countless hours mapping out the chaos. Marcus was already there, looking tired but focused. They didn't speak at first. The weight of what had happened and what still might happen hung between them like a thick fog. Eli pulled out his notebook and wrote quickly, words spilling onto the page. "Everything is fragile. Everything is uncertain. But I am upright. I am here. I will act." Marcus glanced at him, reading the words over his shoulder. "You've changed," he said quietly. "You look anchored, ready." Eli nodded. "It's not about feeling safe. It's about facing what's in front of you. Chaos doesn't wait for anyone." They left the cafe together, moving through the city as if walking into the center of a storm. The streets were alive, full of people, cars, rain puddles reflecting neon signs. Every movement felt magnified, every glance around a question. Eli's heartbeat thrummed in rhythm with the city, not out of fear, but because he was alive. They arrived at the office building. Security cameras blinked silently. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. Inside, everything looked ordinary. But Eli knew better. Chaos had been here. It had left traces in contracts, spreadsheets, whispered suspicions. But he also knew it had limits. He had limits too. And he had learned to stand upright in them. The day was long. They confronted the remaining loose ends, spoke with employees, and rebuilt fractured trust. Every conversation tested patience, courage, and clarity. Eli felt fatigue and adrenaline in equal measure, but each step strengthened something in him, a certainty that came not from controlling the world, but from controlling himself in the midst of it. By evening, the office was quiet. Marcus leaned back, exhausted but alive. "We're not perfect," he said. "Nothing is perfect. But we're here, standing." Eli smiled faintly. Sometimes that's enough. He left the office and walked home. The streets glistened from an afternoon rain. The city felt expansive, alive, full of hidden stories and quiet chaos. He paused across from Mara's building. The familiar light shone in her window. He climbed the stairs, heart steady now, knocking gently. Mara opened the door, paint on her fingers, eyes bright but soft. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. "I needed to see you," Eli replied simply. Thank you for listening to this story here on Momentum Mind. Now I want to hear from you. What book or story of growth should we explore next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this journey inspired you, remember to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Your momentum begins right here.